Welcome to Philadelphia University's Roxboro Roundtable Talks. This episode features Professor Raju Parakkal.
Welcome everybody to the Roxboro Roundtable number 1. My name is Raju Parakkal. I am the Assistant Professor of International Relations and I'm sponsoring this topic, which is the West's sanctions on Russia will it lead to Cold War 2.0. And we have a few fellow faculty and two students joining us for this roundtable discussion. So let me go and let's start with Chris over here. And Chris, would you mind giving a quick introduction to yourself?
My name is Chris Farmer. I'm a second-year architecture major here at Philly U, and I'm in Professor Parakkall's global politics class.
I'm Dylan Gormley. I'm a first-year Law and Society major. That's my intro. I think there's 3 students then, 1 in architecture and 2 in Law and Society. Ooh, 1.
She's the observer.
She's the observer.
My name is Evan Lane. I'm the Director of Law and Society. I'm also the Faculty Director of the Arlen Specter Center for Public Service.
My name is Tom Strand. I'm the Associate Dean for General Education, and I'm a Professor of History in the School of Science, Health, College of Science, Health, and Liberal Arts.
Thank you very much for the quick introductions. To continue with the topic, let me ask all of you to give an opening statement on this issue. It can be anything that you think about it, or if you have a question about it, whatever comes to your mind, like 30 seconds. You can take 30 seconds to give your initial thoughts on this, and then from then, our plan is that based on that and based on a few other questions that we have, we will continue discussing the different ramifications and different sides of this issue. So let me come back to you, Chris, and give you the first opportunity to give an opening statement. Like I said, it can be anything that comes to your mind on this issue. It could be a question, could be a statement, whatever. But let's all stay away at this point from answering that main question, whether this will lead to a Cold War 2.0. We'll take that up at the very end. So, Chris?
When I first heard about this topic, I knew a little bit about it, and I did obviously a little more research. And what my research kind of drove me towards was not necessarily if we're at the edge of Cold War 2.0, but rather if it's just a way of warfare is changing, and whether it should be really called Cold War 2.0 if that's where we're headed, or if it should just be called another war because of the way technology is changing the times that we're experiencing.
I'm kind of a novice in this group. I haven't followed it too closely. I've only read briefly, but from what I've seen of it, what I've read of it, it just seems that there's it's almost like a struggle for power and rush between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine is trying to keep Russia is trying to keep an asset, and it just seems like the United States is trying to just throw themselves in there into the pot and play their normal role of protector, and it's kind of just nonsense. I don't know much.
I'll build on that because what I'm particularly interested in this is in the press, media, and so forth, we get the story, the usual story about our opponent's crazy, an aggressor, out of control, no reason for what they're doing other than uncontrolled ego. But actually, this is a very complicated matter. Putin does have reasons for doing what he's done. The United States has been involved, NATO has been involved, and the situation is far more complicated. And the usual role that the U.S. plays in its press and so forth, of being the innocent victim of a crazy dictator, is not the full story here, and I would like to explore that as well, the U.S. role in bringing this about.
My training's in Russian history. I'm not an expert on contemporary Russia and know even less about contemporary Ukraine, but I kind of see this situation as an embarrassment to the Western liberal powers and to NATO that Putin can do what he's doing and maneuver the way that he's doing and essentially invade another country without us even being able to call it an invasion. I think he's very wily and cunning. I don't think he's insane. I think he's very strategic, but I think he's using our democratic values and our coalition building, as a weapon against us to push us to the edge, try to get as much leverage as he can without provoking an all-out war.
My final turn is mine. So, as a scholar who looks at this from a historical perspective, my biggest interest, apart from answering that big question that we have as the debate topic, is to also look at the history of this development. Like, why did things come to this pass? Because in 1990, when World War 1.0, as some of us, especially me, call it, ended, we all thought that it was the beginning of a new liberal phase. But these events, especially what's been happening in the last 6-7 months, have completely changed their understanding of the new world order that happened after.
What would you mean by new liberal phase? Because that's something.
Yeah, so that is in 1990-91 when the Soviet Union got dismantled and the new leadership in Russia became much closer to the West. They adopted, for example, free markets. They adopted democracy. So free markets and democracy are what is understood as parts of the liberal world order. By liberal, I don't mean in the American sense of liberal. I mean in the classical European sense of the word liberal. Open-minded, so democracy, much more open. People elect their leaders, unlike what happened in the Soviet Union in the past. And free markets, so it's much more open. It's not the government who decides what's the price. And we thought, as somebody famously wrote a book in the early 90s, the end of history. That means there's no more history happening. It's all going to be nice. But it's changed.
That is such an example, though, of American centrism and that everything somehow revolves around us. That was completely wrong.
Yeah.
Russia was Russia.
Yes.
And it was Russian influence and Eastern influence. And when it ended, it's not like they lost, we won. It was an agreement on both sides, actually.
Yeah.
It was best for both to cooperate. But suddenly we see, they're going to be Americanized. And somehow this liberal thought you had, they're going to be Americanized and they're going to be eating apple pie and they're going to do all the things that we do. No, they were doing Russian things. They were nowhere near a democracy.
And
they were an oligarchy at the beginning. And somehow we think that they're part of us. And that was the mistake we made from the beginning.
And we make that mistake all the time and everywhere, including in Iraq in 2003, when we thought that once we took away Saddam Hussein and we put a new order in, it's going to be a mirror image of the United States. Not exactly the same, but somewhat of the best you can get in that part of the world.
Because only our system works.
Well, it's not just the U.S. I mean, the model would be any Western European democracy.
Exactly.
And some of the former, republics of the Soviet Union went on to become fairly successful, stable, free nations.
That's actually a very strong argument.
It's not out of the question for Russia to have done it. It wasn't likely, but it wasn't out of the question. There were some indications they moved that way economically, and politically were less successful opening up, but did have free elections and had the parliament. And they've just been taken over by oligarchs and now by Putin. But I don't see us. And I do think they won the Cold War. I think the Soviet Union clearly lost. Their whole system collapsed. They lost their allies. They lost the republics. Everything fell apart.
But see, the problem is when we view it that way, and as typically going through history, to the victor goes the spoils, and suddenly we own this area, and we pushed Georgia. We pushed in the different city states where they were. We pushed there, and we keep on pushing at them, thinking that, we won, our system should dominate. And what do we expect Putin to do in response to our pushing in the Ukraine, in Georgia, and the other territories? What do we expect him to sit back and say, that's fine?
We shouldn't expect that, but what are we supposed to do as good, liberal Democrats, except to promote our values and expect other people to embrace them? And it's not like we're forcing Georgia or Estonia or Latvia or any of these other republics or former Soviet territories into the EU. they want to go into the EU. The riots in Ukraine were because people thought they were going to join the EU, and then they didn't, and they hated that. So they have their own aspirations, and maybe we shouldn't encourage them. Maybe we should back off. Let them back off.
Yeah, there is something that let's bring. Yeah.
When you Chris, when you read the papers, okay, on this, how do you feel it's being portrayed? Do you think it's been portrayed fairly? Are you understanding Putin's motives, our motives, or the history of this? What are you getting out of it? I'll go to you, Dylan, after that.
I think because the way I've been following this was, reading some American papers, but I've also been looking at some papers overseas and seeing how they portray it. And from what I've gathered, it's been kind of a fair situation in my eyes, what's been going on between, in my eyes at least, Putin isn't really doing anything too bad. Like, the worst thing I think that he did in this case was stand there and say, vote, do you want to be part of Russia? And he didn't pull his troops out. He left the troops there and started occupying them. And obviously they're going to vote in favor of joining Russia if you have a Russian soldier standing there. And so, in my eyes, I think it's a case where the U.S. is overstepping their boundaries. But I kind of see both sides because of the way I particularly read about it.
From your own research.
Yes.
What are you doing?
What I've seen on the news, and again, having not really followed it too in-depthly, it seems that we're trying to do what we always do and step in and control and try and Westernize and Americanize anything that we deem is not all right. We're trying to be that safeguard again. And it just seems that this is something between Ukraine and Russia, and we have no business in it. But still, we're trying to. It just.
Yeah, I mean, you said something, I want to branch off that. To me, it's not. This is not about Ukraine, although we think it's about Ukraine. This is, to a certain extent, about the way I see it. Two things. One, and this again goes back to what Tom said. Russia's inability to be a liberal democracy and to be a participant in the liberal world. And as Tom said, there were other republics, like for example Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all those countries that came out of the whole 15 Soviet republics, and they went into became amazingly great EU participants, great liberal democracies. So this is a bit of Russia not becoming liberal democracy, and there are internal issues with that, especially with the rise of Putin inside Russia.
Why would we ever reasonably expect a country with no history at all of democracy, coming from one oppressive regime to the other, whether it was the Tsar or it was the Communist Party, all of a sudden to wake up one day and go, oh, we're a democracy, we're barely a democracy here.
No, it is happening. Like I said, there are other republics that were part of the Soviet Union that had the exact same history, but they successfully transferred to a new model.
Well, the most successful ones did have a history of democracy. So the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania.
Yes, they were different from Russia.
They were brought in late, and they were very different and had a whole different.
That's true.
So yeah, we shouldn't be too surprised that Russia didn't make that transition. But every country that's a democracy now, at one point, was a dictatorship. Eventually, countries, France was an aristocracy, and they eventually became a democracy.
Yeah,
so it can't happen.
It can happen, but again, I go back to what I was saying. My two reasons why the way I see this conflict, it is not, and I say it's not about Ukraine. It's about Russia's inability to become a liberal democracy and be part of the whole liberal world. The other one is our inability to understand that when we get closer and closer to Russia, we are making Putin madder and madder. And I think so.
When you say we, NATO,
the United States. Right. Let's do a thought experiment. What if China started getting very close to Mexico and other countries close to us, Cuba or Canada? Think about it. Well, how would we feel about it?
We have the perfect example. When the Soviet Union is close to Cuba, we're still freaked out over Cuba. We still don't even have a relationship with that country, which is another topic for another time.
Exactly.
So look how we've reacted.
My point exactly. So I want to know how others feel about that particular line of thinking, that this is not necessarily entirely about Ukraine. Or Ukraine is so unlucky to be in that particular spot, and being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people.
Right.
So, but if you want to branch off into something else, I know maybe Tom has a different take on that.
No, I'm just thinking about your thought experiment and what if it wasn't Russia and Ukraine? I mean, what strikes me is that we've got one sovereign country undermining and kind of secretly invading another one. Is that okay? Can we just so if it wasn't Russia and Ukraine, we don't have a close relationship with Ukraine necessarily. We don't have a military alliance. There's no reason for us to jump in.
So you condemn a country invading another country. We have the Yiddish word is chutzpah, okay? And chutzpah is, the definition of chutzpah is that somebody kills their parents and pleads for the mercy of the court that he's now an orphan, okay? That's chutzpah. The United States, after invading Iraq, not too long ago, which has led to, and you can tie in what's going on now to that as well. How do we have the moral or ethical authority to turn to Russia and go, what you're doing is wrong?
I think anyone can tell anyone what they're doing is wrong, whether they have moral authority or not. But no, I think the Iraq invasion was an illegal invasion. I think the world community should have punished us for that, just like we're trying to punish, except we're too big, they're scared to punish us. Just like we're scared to punish Russia too strictly because of the repercussions. But yeah, is it okay? Is what's happening okay just in the abstract? This one country.
Can I ask the question this? Should we even care? Because is it within our interests? All right, this is happening, so.
Well,
So
before we get to that,
should we go ahead?
can I ask you a question? You said like we're like being tentative to punish them too strictly. Why didn't dip our toe in the water?
Why didn't start?
Yeah, why are we gonna even start giving them any tariffs or anything like that? Why not just stay out?
Just
Why?
completely stay out.
Yeah.
Because probably, I mean, my guess would be that then it just emboldens them to go further. And we very quickly get into the Hitler analogy of letting he does one little thing and we say okay.
Hitler ruined it for everybody.
Yeah, he ruined it for dictators everywhere. So yeah, do you appease or do you take a hard line and deter them from taking further aggression? So I think this is where the fine line we're trying to walk. If he sees he gets away with this, then he'll try the next thing. If he gets away with that, he'll try the next thing. And when do you draw the line? Like with Hitler, in retrospect, if we'd taken a firmer stand earlier, maybe we could have nipped that.
I can see this argument going on somewhere in the East, saying, George Bush, he was just like Hitler. He invaded Afghanistan, he invaded Kuwait, Iraq, all these things. It always depends on what side you're looking at it.
Absolutely.
We have done all of this, but because it's us, it's right.
No, I don't think it's right. I think it's wrong when we do it too. And the world has the right to condemn us and sanction us, whatever they want to do. In some cases they do that. In some cases they're intimidated to do it. So I don't know. I'm definitely not defending our foreign policy or our invasions. Some of our invasions have been sanctioned by international organizations. United Nations has sanctioned some of them.
Approved them, yeah.
Some they haven't. So those I consider out of line.
Yeah. I mean, also to answer your question, it's largely what Tom said, that you don't want it to be something that countries can get away with. That you invade another country and then you can get away with it. And it's also a lot more than that. Like I always said in my global politics classes all the time, the Cold War is over, the Soviet Union is gone, but Russia is still around. So let's not kid ourselves that we have completely turned a new page. We could have, but we didn't. And the other way of looking at this would be that it's not a Cold War 2.0, but it's just an extension of Cold War 1.0.
Mm-hmm.
We thought that it ended, whereas in the minds of people like Putin, it never ended. In fact, if you read some of what he's a very difficult man to understand. But if you try to understand, if you get some information about what he's thinking, especially in the Kremlin, which is their White House, he is not thinking about the Soviet era. He's thinking about the Tsarist 100 years ago era. He sees himself as the person who brought back Russia into that prime time. He wants history to see him like that.
Yeah, I would like to ask you,
Yeah, so this is-
what was historically the relationship to Kiev, Ukraine, Moscow? What's that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really complicated. I'm not an expert on that area because it's a very contested area that's traded hands back and forth. So the borders have been redrawn
Many
many times. So, but kind of the origins of what's now the Russian people is kind of in Kiev and Rus, which is kind of a place where Russian culture was born. So yeah, there's that area, and it's right now there's a lot of Russian speakers in the eastern part of Ukraine. People who ethnically, culturally feel themselves to be Russian, even if they're living in Ukraine. And they all used to be in the same country, the Soviet Union. So when Ukraine broke off, it took this large Russian population with them. Just like Czechoslovakia took a German population with them in their borders. So that's, I think what Raju's saying is really on point. Putin is a Russian nationalist, I think. He doesn't want to recreate the Soviet Union, who had all these other ethnic groups in it that never really got along and got integrated. But he wants all the Russian people in one territory, and he sees them over in Ukraine, he sees them in Crimea, he sees them in a few other places.
So he sees Russian people, part of his nationalist point of view,
I think so.
being pushed by Western forces to be separated from Russia.
Well, there's that, but I think he also wants to protect Russia. So he wants a buffer zone between Russia and its traditional enemies like Germany.
Do you think that if the United States were to back out right now, it would lower the tensions between Ukraine and Russia? I feel like Russia is kind of pushing maybe a little bit harder just because of our presence. Because you're right, it's an extension of the Cold War. It's kind of, especially with Putin, who thinks it's the whole czar's thing. He shows his power, iron fist, and I think that with the United States presence there, it's making him push a little harder. And it's kind of, I don't know, I just feel...
The U.S. Does not have troops because Ukraine is not part of NATO, so the U.S. does not have troops there. The closest we have troops is in Romania, which is a NATO member. What's that?
Did they decide to send troops in?
Oh no, that would be war.
That would be
war. That would be war.
war.
Yeah, we haven't done that. No, it's okay. These are the questions that
Yeah,
are
yeah.
helpful. So so the closest we have is Romania, which is a NATO member, and that's kind of the if you want to talk about it, that's Putin's beef that we have countries like Romania, which were part of the Soviet satellite states, part of NATO now, and so he's lost that. To go back to what Tom was saying, he's lost that buffer. They have lost that buffer.
Dylan makes a really good point, though, because we talk about economic sanctions being something we're doing.
Yeah.
Ramping up the tensions. That's what you're saying. We don't have troops, thank God. But the economic, if looking for a solution to this, I know it's so typically un-American to back off because that would be a sign of weakness. But are we, by these economic sanctions, actually ramping up and making a sort of, I won't use the word war, between Putin and Obama, where it becomes a power and ego situation? And by entering in, we might have thrown flame on or gas on a flame instead of put it out. That's what you're saying. I like that. What do you think? Yeah.
So to talk to that point, you mentioned the liberal free.
The liberal order.
The free idea.
Yeah.
And a lot of American companies have taken advantage of that and got a lot of business in Russia. And these economic sanctions are putting more stress on our economy as an effect because those companies aren't getting the funds from Russia, but the profit from Russia as they would have been because their products can't be sold in Russia because of the tariffs. So to go off your point, I think the U.S. knows what they're doing when they are trying to put the pressure on them because they don't want to hurt our economy, especially in the current state it's in. But I don't know if there would be another route because I feel like we do have to do something about it. Not, like I said, I'm not going to defend our foreign policy of going to other countries, but I do think someone needs to step in and say, hey, you can't do this. They're a sovereign nation. We can't just go in there. It's kind of ironic. It's us in this case. We like to make our own rules and break them, I guess. But that's where I stand on that.
Just a point of what you're saying. That's why we should be very careful.
Yeah.
in our foreign policy, because when we do things like we did in Iraq, it takes away the power of the world. If we come out and say, what you said, it's wrong to invade foreign countries, and if we never invaded foreign countries, then we'd have some moral backing, authority. But it's almost, I think people in different countries hear that coming from our president think it's laughable.
Yeah. And I think that's where some of Putin's actions and aggression comes from, because he's like, oh, I'm not going to listen to you because of what we did. So I think, you can't change history now. But had we not done what we did in Iraq and those other countries, I don't think Putin would be pushing back as hard as he is. And that goes back to your point about the aggression.
If I can play devil's advocate a bit here on that, we didn't use none of us use the word hypocrisy with that, but when it comes to the U.S. foreign policy, that, we make the laws and the rules and we break them. But here's the thing: it is the sign of a superpower that it can be hypocritical in its foreign policy. Only superpowers can do that.
That is our superpower.
That is a superpower.
It all started with Jefferson.
if we were not hypocritical in our foreign policy, we, in a sense, are not satisfying the checkboxes of being a superpower, because that is the ultimate sign of superpower, that you can be hypocritical, and the world will accept it.
And being a superpower also means that the world comes to us when something has to be fixed.
Exactly.
They're being mean to us. You need to come help us and fix it. And that's, so that's kind of what the world's looking to us now to do. And because we don't have, Ukraine is not necessarily a strategic ally for us. So we don't have a lot at stake. In fact, the sanctions are easier for us because we have less ties with Russia. It's really hard on the European countries who are much more integrated with Russia's economy.
But I have a question about that. Not to bring up Sudan, but we didn't. What was our involvement in Sudan? Did we really have an involvement when the two countries decided to divide?
Sudan?
I don't follow that.
Sudan or?
Yeah, because now there's North and South of Sudan, rather.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really have involvement there. And so the point that I'm going to lead to is if we didn't involve there and they were able to divide themselves by themselves, why couldn't Ukraine, if they really felt divided,
Okay, I understand.
want to be part of Russia, why couldn't they just divide themselves without our interference?
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's a little different because Sudan is a civil war, so it's one country splitting into two, where this is Russia coming into Ukraine and taking a piece.
They didn't. Crimea did have the vote whether or not they wanted to become part of Russia. That's
that was
another issue.
No, that vote was back in March. The more you read about that vote, when before the vote was counted, everybody knew that what's going to happen. So that was just a formality, but we all knew what was going to happen. So.
But they have done polls in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And there are certain areas, depending where you are, where the Russian speakers are overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
Want to be part of part of Russia.
Yeah.
So why not? Why are we stepping in there and interfering with the internal politics of other countries when it doesn't have any effect on us? I mean, there was a security risk to the United States of some kind, but there's none. And Ukraine is a bankrupt country. I mean, let's not forget the incredible corruption in that country. Who wants to be involved in that anyway? It's almost like a gift. Russia, you want this mess? Go ahead, take it. Why does it involve us? If they want it, the people want it. Why are we involved?
It's called there's a part of social science theory called signaling. It's signal. We are signaling to the world that we are weak, that we cannot handle a bullet. So. We might think that, not getting involved in that would save our soldiers' lives, but in the long run, what we are signaling to the rest of the world is we are willing to put up with a quote-unquote bully. And that's not good if you're a strong alliance like NATO, and especially because Ukraine has interest to be part of NATO and be part of the European Union. And that's very terrifying for Putin. So Ukraine, again, I go back to what I said before, it's just caught in the middle, caught in the crossfire, and so Ukraine has become emblematic of two alliances, or one alliance and one country, fighting over who is more superior, whose word runs the world.
What do you guys think of that? What Professor Parakkal said of the bully thing? That we have to stand up somehow the bullies in the world. It's the U.S. Responsibility.
I think that the United States thinks that we are the police of the world. We generally believe that it's our role in the world to keep everyone else in line. And we have time and time again overstepped our boundaries. We do it all the time. It's one of our trademarks.
Yeah, so if you ask people in the Middle East and in South Asia, they would say the US is the bully.
Yeah.
So the term bully is very subjective. Like who you ask is going to determine who is the bully in the world. So
You know, the ultimate joke in all this is, by us pushing NATO, we forced Putin to do this. And in Putin doing what he's doing, he's strengthening NATO. Because now all the NATO countries are coming together, and both sides are not getting what they want.
yeah,
And it's almost laughable.
And it's the same with the sanctions.
that's what yeah.
Yeah, he does something aggressive. We put sanctions. He wants us. He wants some leverage to get us to take the sanctions down. So he does something more. Takes even more territory, and we put it more. It's like this ratcheting, where both sides are committing deeper and deeper to get leverage on the other.
The sanctions are actually a first line of defense in this case, or offense in this case. And there are two pieces of news that are coming out of Russia. One line it says sanctions are not doing anything to Russia or anything to Putin. The other line is saying sanctions is keeping Russian economy in a recession. Russian economy grew by just around 1%. It was growing around 4 to 5% before the sanctions hit. So, and we have been ratcheting up the sanctions. The sanctions are very targeted, extremely targeted on the close aides of Putin and some of the key sectors of the Russian economy. So it's not like how we put sanctions on Cuba, where it was a blanket sanction and the people who really suffered are the Cuban people. This one is a little more thoughtful, and I would say that it is having an effect on those people, but here's the thing. They can survive with those sanctions. If we think that the sanctions are going to make Putin or the Russian people turn around and say, yes, we surrender, it's not going to happen. If anything, Putin's popularity in Russia has only gone up.
Going back to what you just said, instead of bringing things down, our rhetoric has increased the opposition to us,
Yes.
and his rhetoric has increased the opposition to him.
Yeah.
So where's the solution of all this?
Just to go back to what I said at the beginning, we actually had wonderful relations with Putin because when we went after Al Qaeda after 9/11, Putin allowed us to fly over Russian airspace. Putin allowed us to use Russian ground space, everything to transport stuff. Don't get me wrong, I'm not in favor or against President Obama, but I think there has been a bit of a downturn in the U.S.-Russia relations after after the new administration took over in 2008, and there has not been leader-to-leader contact is very important, and that has just broken down between Obama and Putin.
The Georgia thing happened under Bush, though, right?
Just around the time when it was changing.
So, because my reading of it, correct me if I'm wrong, is that actually it was very good under Bush, and then it sunk really bad towards the end, really bad. And when Obama came in, he called for a reset. He called it the relationship, and then it rose up again.
Yeah.
And then Congress got involved.
Yeah.
They finally passed something, which they could avoided passing something, which sanctioned Russia for civil rights, which I always think is lovely when this country talks to other countries about civil rights violations. This is a country in World War II when we wouldn't allow blacks to fight with whites. We're talking about civil rights around the world. So we got involved in their internal politics again, stupidly.
Yeah.
And that brought it down. But the point I'm saying that is, he is amenable to discussion. He has shown that in the past. But he's also shown he's not amenable to force.
Yeah.
So why do we keep on avoiding the logical answer, which is to negotiate and bring down the tension, and we keep on ratcheting things up? That's what it confounds me.
And to go back to the questions of Dylan and Chris, like about U.S. involvement here, here is the fun fact. Putin is not concerned about the United States. From all that I have read recently about this issue, he doesn't really give much of a time or attention to President Obama. He is only focused on what the Germans and the French and the British, because London is important as a financial capital for Russian capital in and out. That's what he's focused on. He couldn't care less about President Obama and what President Obama thinks. And so we can ratchet up whatever we need, whatever we can, and whatever we wish to, but I doubt if it's going to have much of an effect, unless the Europeans are going to do even more, which they have done. So as Tom said, that has been having much more effect than the American stuff.
And it's harder for them because they got more
they
say. But it seems like Angela Merkel is
finally turned around.
Yeah, getting more adamant.
It's a German problem.
Yep. So, yeah. So I don't know what this means for Putin's response, but yeah, I don't know.
You can't solve it right here, right now?
Yeah.
What's that?
We can't solve it right here, right now?
I just feel like
we have 10 minutes to solve it.
I don't know. I feel like neither side really wants to threaten. There's no, they have no agenda to dominate the other side. Putin does not want to invade Poland, for example. He doesn't want to invade, Western Ukraine. He might want the little eastern parts that have Russian populations. And I think that's as far as he wants to go. And NATO doesn't want to invade Ukraine. NATO doesn't want to invade Russia. I mean, why do we even have NATO at this point? When I was reading some of the articles,
we have NATO because Putin's moving, doing things. Putin brought it back to life, which is
the whole idea of the military alliance was to offset the Soviet bloc. The Soviet bloc's gone. We could have dissolved NATO and just gone about our business. The fact that NATO exists and it's getting bigger and it's getting closer to Russia's borders, as you said at the beginning, it is threatening to Russia, and it is going to make them feel paranoid.
If you go to any politician now, they're going to say, more sanctions.
Yeah.
We have to be tough.
Can never be
tougher and tougher and tougher and tougher, and that's not going to end this. It's not.
No, it's not.
But what politicians are going to come out and talk about negotiations? They're going to throw out the Hitler Chamberlain thing, which always comes out. You can't talk. You can't be reasonable. It's Hitler. It is because, maybe that was one isolated situation in history when you had a psychopath leading a country that was controlled by other psychopaths. Maybe when you're dealing with a nation like keep saying it, Russia, maybe he's not Hitler. I doubt he's Hitler. I haven't seen him putting anyone in death camps yet. So
he's assassinated many of his enemies.
Yeah.
He has cold-bloodedly killed his opponents in different ways.
Dylan and Chris, what do you think? How do you think the West should? So now that we know we have some sanctions, but what's your suggestion for the West to do in this situation? What do you think we should do?
I mean, I wouldn't have liked to see us not get involved in the first place, but it goes back to the superpower thing, like you were saying. We're there, you're not going to back off because that shows weakness. So once we're there, I feel like we're already committed to it in a sense, and we have to just keep going with it as much as it's going to stink for us. We just have to sit this one out and be there, and whatever the effects are, I feel like we have to be ready to face.
As far as even going to war, because then you remember, when you go down this road, you have to say that you will go down all the way, and all the way is on conflict with Russia.
I think it would be great if the U.S. keep ratcheting it down, and then the EU is like, oh, we have U.S. backing, and then they step up because, like you said, he only cares about what the EU leaders think. So I think U.S. is trying to take a lead role like we always do, but I feel like ideally there'd be a certain point where we just kind of pass it off to the EU. Not that I think we should be passing off problems like that, starting problems and giving it to someone else, but I think that would be a best way out option if there's such thing. I don't think U.S. should go to war at this point. However, the tensions rising are kind of leading to that. But like I said, I'd rather see the EU step up and be the EU.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that the United States really, we should always keep an eye out and be ready for whatever happens. But I think in this instance, we just need to let it go and not be involved. We need to back out a little bit because no war is worth it at this point. I mean, we've we've seen so many throughout history. I don't think we need another one between. And we had the Cold War. Nothing happened this time around. I don't want to see the war if it did get to that point. It would be more than anyone needs to deal with.
I was going to say the impression from these articles is that nobody is anticipating going to war over Ukraine. Like, he could take the whole country. We're not going to go to war. Where we do have to go to war is if he invaded a NATO ally. So if he invaded Poland or the Baltic states, then we're kind of obliged or committed to defend them. So that's what makes the whole thing kind of a sham and a farce, is that Putin knows he can do whatever he wants. He's not going to get invaded. We could arm Ukraine, we could sell them weapons, give them military training. American soldier, the boots of an American soldier are going to touch Ukrainian soil for this over Ukrainian issue. So he, so it's up to him how daring he wants to be in terms of taking chunks of this country. But I think all he has to fear is sanctions. And,
So look what we've done by not negotiating. We put in our sanctions, and we waste how much power capital on this, because he's going to do what he's going to do anyway.
Well, but
we're with it.
Everyone's setting up for negotiations, though. His military moves are to give him leverage for negotiations. Our sanctions to give us leverage for negotiations. Well, I mean, I don't know, I just saw this in the news 2 hours ago, that I forget where he was. He was visiting some country, and he got off the plane with some notes on a notepad saying, here are my 8 suggestions for a negotiated settlement of this. So he's kind of already laying out a kind of peace plan.
With a smiley face. He'll be a good guy.
So I think ultimately he wants to be in strong power to negotiate the kind of outcome he wants and to get the sanctions taken off of him. And maybe he wouldn't have negotiated if the sanctions weren't pressuring him.
Yeah, the sanctions are pressuring him because they are very targeted. One of the funny things goes back to what you said about the eight demands or suggestions he had, is that he gives them, and then he also tells his troops to kind of get closer to Ukraine. The other day, last week, he was having a talk with Poroshenko, the Ukrainian Prime Minister, and while they're having a talk and talking about how to resolve this, at the same time, he was telling his troops to go over. So, he has this. It's very hard to understand this man. He looks very. It looks very difficult to understand. But he has this 2-track system going on. So sometimes when you're dealing with a person like that, it's very difficult to decide how should we tackle this person. And to go back to what Dylan and Chris said, that we should stay out of this, it's too late for us at this point. It's too late. And that's what is kind of called what we call as brinkmanship. That means once you reach the brink, we can't pull yourself back. Because now if we pull ourselves back, that's amazing show of weakness. Already he doesn't believe that the US is as strong as it is portraying itself. So he thinks that the EU has a very divided foreign policy, which is actually very true. If we pull back now, there's no way back now at this point without completely telling not just Putin, but also the rest of the world that we are really weak. Here you go, do whatever you want. And we are also signaling to, again, I go back to my signaling thing, not just to Putin, we are signaling to the rest of the world that they can be more bullies and will not do anything about it.
Right, because doesn't China have
territorial ambitions?
Claims on islands in the Pacific?
It has claims on pretty much every country around it. But this time it's so, kind of to wrap this up, how would you see this situation? Let's start this time from Tom, on this side, right? And what do you think? Is it going to be a new Cold War? Is it going to be, unfortunately, a real war? Or what's your take?
I don't see how it could be a Cold War, because the Cold War was about 2 superpowers who had global reach and global ambitions, and it was a struggle for world domination, basically. So Russia can't be an opponent in a second Cold War because they're not powerful enough. They are really much weaker than we are, and their economy is not that strong. The military is kind of in shambles. They're stronger than Ukraine, but they don't take us on militarily, and they can't operate around the globe. We're the only nation in the world that has fleets in all the major oceans and military bases in all the continents. So it'll be like Iran. It'll be just a chronic, festering a source of tension and annoyance for us. But I don't see it being a Cold War. Well, yeah, we'll have bad relations with Russia, but I would call it a Cold War.
I agree with you on this. You don't have two matched opponents at this point. But I don't think it will be, if we handle this right, I think it would be a situation where we can get along with Russia.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's inevitable.
Right. I think that it has to be handled right. We have to understand that other countries have egos, that other countries have nationalist feelings. And anytime you have a negotiation, both parties have to walk away from it, feeling they got something. And we've got to get away from our thing of dominance and it's us, because that will never work. So if we're clever enough to sit down and have him have his pride, which is very important, and Russian pride, and work out for all parties, that could happen. But I'm not that optimistic about that, mind how we've handled things in the past.
Dylan?
It's a very precarious. You were talking about it very lightly, but I just feel like massive conflicts start from such little things that we are involved. You're right. We need to keep an eye on it at this point. I wish we could just back out, but you're right. We're too far past it. And the whole thing, we've shown weakness. I'm not a really big advocate for it. I mean, I feel like we should be able to show weakness. I don't think we should be in a place where, in a world, this is a personal thing, but we shouldn't be in a world where your power is everything. It means everything. You're not gonna, if you show any slightest weakness, you're gonna be coming under attack. I don't like it. But back to the point, I just feel that it's not going to come to a head, but we need to be wary of it because it so easily could turn into a huge conflict, and we can get it and do it before we even know what happened. It just kind of frightens me a little bit. It's definitely worth paying more attention to.
I like Dylan's line that just like how hypocrisy is a sign of a superpower, to show weakness and to live with it is a sign of a superpower.
Sometimes
It's an amazing line.
Sometimes you're wrong.
It bothers me that it can't be. You're right, if we do show weakness, then a lot of other countries are going to start to take advantage, but why does it have to be like that? It's such an annoyance because just give in to something and let it go, and things are a lot easier. I don't know.
I have to laugh because Obama at this point can't even wear a tan suit without being accused of weakness.
What would Sarah Palin say?
If he caves into Russia, forget it. So, I'm sorry.
To go off what you were saying, I feel like I agree. I feel like we should be able to show weakness, but I feel like Obama's not willing to do that given the past decade, basically, of our foreign policy. But I will agree with you too as well. I don't think it's going to amount to a Cold War 2.0. I feel like it's just going to be rising tensions. It's not going to be as a war. It's going to be just tensions rising and rising, but nothing really coming of it. I feel like a resolution where, be a great outcome where we have good relations, or at least better relations with them, is not ever going to happen with Russia at this point. But I would like to see us just kind of come out even. I feel like Russia, no matter what, is not going to try giving up Crimea, but it'll be interesting to see if we decide to give Crimea, what we'll get back from them. So I feel like that's one of his strong points, and I'm going to be looking forward to see what kind of resolution they come out with.
What we did in the 1990s after the end of the Cold War to create some kind of a connection between the West and Russia, in my opinion, that has created an interdependent system that is very difficult for Russia to get back into a Cold War situation with the West, whether we want it or not. So that is something that, even though it just lasted 10 years or 12, 14, 15 years, whatever we trying to create that interdependencies, that is so good that it's unthinkable now for these two sides to go into a Cold War 2. But having said that, so I don't really believe that it's going to be, as I told Jesse, when she asked me about this last week. So I don't think it's going to be a Cold War 2.0 exactly like how 1.0 was, but I think unfortunately we kind of blew a golden chance to create a different. When I say we, I don't mean the United States. I mean the whole world. We, both Putin and us, kind of blew it to create a completely different relations with Russia. Probably because after a while we started thinking, and just like President Obama said, we started thinking of Russia just as a regional power. And many scholars have noted that we haven't given Russia yes, Russia lost the Cold War, but we should have handled Russia a little more with a little more respect. That's our mistake, and Russia's mistake is that it should have acted a little more like a world leader and not like a sulking loser. So there are mistakes on both ends, but I think we have unfortunately entered a new normal, as I would call it, where it's going to be a very frosty, very distrustful relationship. Unless we have new leadership that comes in and changes the whole thing. So we don't want a leader who dictates to each other on both sides. Putin doesn't dictate, but we know how he thinks about the West. And we don't want a leader on any of the European or American leaders who tell Putin and Russians how they should behave, because they don't like, because then they start feeling like, oh, we are the losers of this first Cold War. That's why they are talking to us like that. And so if we can try to get back that power, then these people will start talking to us like that, talking down to us like that. So the thought process. They are proud people. Everybody's proud, especially one that was a superpower. So to me, it won't be a Cold War 2.0, but I think we have entered a very uncomfortable, unfortunate new normal. If anybody else wants to add, any audience questions? We have three people who are audiences.
I think, honestly...
introduce yourself, please.
Hello, I'm Neil Andrus. At this point, administrative support for a few of our graduate health programs. Which I think you really have hit on a lot of the key elements of why this will continue, which is kind of digging heels in of once you're off the starting block, you're off the starting block. Once we're in the race, we're running, and it is ratcheting up. And there is a grid, as you were talking about. Is it possible that our involvement is increasing tension? I think there is the heel digging in where you would not be seeing a huge difference, but it's not going to leave the forefront of Putin's mind because there's now American involvement. But we are dealing with a very different world from the world, for some of us, that existed for the majority of our lives. That you are still looking at a global power in Russia, but not a superpower. So I do think that anything near that scale, especially for my memory, the early 80s scale, is unapproachable now. And optimism reigns for me. As there's ratcheting up, I think if there is a chance to come to some agreement that really can newspaper headline look great for each country, if we can both step out with something that really can lead without bleeding, that relations could return to the late 90s relations, which were really remarkable for someone whose life was the Cold War. Sting songs of, I hope the Russians love their children to level of division, of this world where any relation seemed impossible outside of kind of active youth. I think it's possible to return to that.
I guess this would be a good time to thank everyone.